They say it's your birthday. You didn't write those plays. Hello, welcome to our live edition here of the Blue Boar Tavern, brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. I'm Jonathan, your bartender. Welcome to all our loyal guests and visitors. Good to see you again. Go to your usual table, chat amongst yourselves. You can ask us questions with the question and answer button at your table there. And again, no guarantees that we'll be able to get to all of them. We appreciate them. So thank you so much. It's good to see you. Have fun. This is your place. And also, I want to just greet all our future viewers on YouTube, who we keep getting more and more of, I'm glad to say. And I just want to remind you, YouTubers, if you'd like to take another step and join us live here, like all our friends right now are, look up the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, look at all the information, the videos, and think about joining or at least getting on our mailing list. And then you too could be here right now at this moment. So our friends should be joining us in a minute. Our Oxfordian scholars, Dorothea Dickerman, there she is right there.
Hey.
Hey, Dorothea.
Hey. How are you doing?
Okay, I'm okay. Alex McNeil is walking in right now. Hey, Alex. Bonner Miller Cutter is coming. Phoebe, our resident cool young person, had a prior scheduling conflict, and we knew about that. Sends her greetings, I'm sure. So today is the world is celebrating the birthday of somebody we think didn't write anything. So we were going to be cheeky and do an episode about, not sparing stones or disturbing his bones or things like that. But an even better option came up. Hank Whittemore, our distinguished guest, has managed to arrange to join us again. Hank was here talking about the Essex Rebellion in February, and there was such a demand for him to do a part 2 on the aftermath of the Essex Rebellion. We thought, yeah, let's grab him. So, hello, Hank. Thank you so much.
Howdy.
And
glad to be here.
Well, it's always great. I thought for all of us, in the spirit of Alex always brings us up, is don't assume people know things. Assume there are some beginners out there. I thought maybe we'd do a summary of that last episode briefly, but when last we left our heroes, the Earl of Essex and Southampton. So what was the Essex Rebellion? Why is it important to Shakespeare? Why is it important to the authorship question? And let's carry on from there.
Sorry, I could just, if I might, set a little groundwork, and if anybody has anything to add, that'd be great. What does this have to do with our authorship question about Shakespeare? We Oxfordians, we believe that Oxford adopted the name Shakespeare as a pen name, and that he introduced it twice on the narrative poems Venus and Adonis in 1593 and Lucrece in 1594, which is approximately 8 or 9 years prior, 7 or 8 years prior to the so-called Essex Rebellion. Oxford did not put his pen name on the cover of those narrative poems. It was Venus and Adonis, and it was Lucrece, no author. Inside the book, each one is a dedication. Each dedication is to the Earl of Southampton. The second dedication particularly, both are pretty caring and sensitive dedications. But the second one is, the love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have, devoted yours. And both these dedications were to Southampton. So now if you jump 8 years to the Essex Rebellion that failed, why are we concerned with it? Because one of the two earls, who are both now in the Tower on the night of February 8th, and is quite expected that they will die, and be convicted first and die because they were convicted of high treason against the crown. Whether they were guilty of that or not is another question. I think last time when we went through the Essex Rebellion, I tried to point out that it was quite a bumbly affair, and it was not happening when they wanted it to happen. I think they planned it a week hence. So, and then the crown comes in, and very soon there will be a trial, and the crown will say, you're accused of trying to slay the queen and subvert the government, which means take over. It's high treason to slay the monarch and to subvert the government, whatever that means. I take it to mean total insurrection. So the only other thing I point out for myself, and then let somebody else chime in, is that in my view, and I can demonstrate, in the middle of the sonnets, to the younger man, who I take to be Southampton, there are 100 in a row. And my belief is that from the night of the Essex Rebellion, he wrote one sonnet, or he included one sonnet per day for approximately 40 days. And thereby and it's like a chronicle diary of to be preserved for future eyes, not future readers, not current. He did not publish these during his lifetime, and they didn't get into print as Shakespeare's sonnets until 1609, which is 5 years after Oxford either died or just disappeared. Now, therefore, he was writing for himself and for history, for eyes not yet created, as he expressed it in Sonnet 81. So what does this tell us? Here we are with a chronicle, and we have it in our hands that the author is talking to history, to posterity. And I find it amazing and incredible. And I find that in these 100, he tells us why and how he disappeared, mainly why. We have an authorship question. He answers it, which is remarkable. He even tips it off. He says in Sonnet 72, I believe it is, my name be buried where my body is. And in Sonnet 81, he says, I once gone, to all the world must die. Well, if that isn't the authorship question, I don't know what would be. He's saying, I'm going to disappear. I'm not going to, we know he's going to die, but to all the world, I must die. Meaning that they won't know who I am. They won't know that I was the writer of Shakespeare. And they will not know until the future. If they read this diary, this chronicle history that unfolds in the last years of Oxford's life, up to a year before he dies. And I find it remarkable that I've always kind of sensed that in the sonnets is our answer as to the authorship question, what happened and why. And we can start back at the beginning of the Essex Rebellion, but that's an overview of mine. And the reason we are interested in the Essex Rebellion, as far as I can tell, is that Southampton is the only link between Shakespeare and anybody. And he did that deliberately 8 years prior to the rebellion. And there's no explanation until we look in these sonnets that were on a very personal, unpublished level. So,
well, as people, sorry, Hank, as people, I was going to say, as people pointed out, the sonnets and those two letters are the only places where Shakespeare wrote in the first person.
yes, this is true. And it's a very good point to make. We have the author speaking for himself. And I do not find them to be fluff or just pretty poetry. I find them to be, the more I know about them, the more I read them, they are very deep in terms of feeling and expressing the author's real emotional turmoil.
Alex, were you gesturing, Alex?
I was gesturing, yes. I just wanted to add two things just to by way of background. First, a timeline, in case everybody needs a little reminder. First, the if you want to call it, the criminal justice system at that time worked very, very quickly. The insurrection, if you want to call it that, was February 8th, 1601. The conspirators were arrested that evening and imprisoned. The trial took place just a few days later. The trial for Essex and Southampton was before a panel of 25 noblemen, of whom Oxford was the most senior. So Oxford himself was on the jury of 25 people that had to render a verdict. At least
I might say, Alex, it was 11 days after it was the 19th of February.
But it had been planned. It had been planned for some time.
And then just a few days later, the first person, Essex, is executed. He's beheaded.
Yes.
Everybody is waiting for Southampton, who also was found guilty and received the same sentence. Everybody was waiting for Southampton's execution day after day after day. Didn't happen. And eventually, it sort of becomes known, although there's no official record about it, that Southampton's sentence has been commuted to life imprisonment. And he stays in the Tower of London. He forfeits his goods and titles and so on. He stays in the Tower of London through the rest of Queen Elizabeth's reign, which is another 2 years. She dies in, is it March 1603? And one of the very first things that James does when he receives news that he has now succeeded Elizabeth, that Elizabeth is dead, he orders Southampton's release from the Tower. He makes that order even before he has left Scotland to return to England, to come to England to take the throne. I think that's a very interesting detail. And then turning to the sonnets, I just wanted to clarify for people who might not be familiar with everyone by number. Hank's theory is basically that the sonnets are mathematically structured and that there is a central array of exactly 100 sonnets from sonnet 27 to 126. The last 100 sonnets that are addressed to the fair youth are the central 100 sonnets that deal with Southampton and his fate, starting with the evening of the Essex Rebellion. And so your theory is that the first 40 of them, which would be 27 through, was that 66?
Yes.
Correspond to one sonnet a day. That doesn't mean they were written on a daily basis. It means they were assigned each to one day. And then for the remainder of the 60 of those, the next 60 of those 100 sonnets.
The next 40, I would say.
Well, the next 60 don't take place on a day-to-day basis. They're spaced out more in time.
The first 80 of the 100 are 40 days and then 40 sonnets.
Yeah, which is 27 to 66. Yeah.
That's right.
And this is all in your books, Hanks, in case people want to go into more detail.
That's right. No, Alex, you have it actually absolutely right. I just trying to clarify that then there are 20 others that make 80 plus 20 100. the middle of those 80s, in 66, as you mentioned, is a suicide note. I would prefer to die if it were not the fact that I'll leave my love alone. He calls Southampton my love in the Tower. He didn't say the Tower, but I assume that's what he meant. The next day, the next sonnet, 67, is Why Should He Live? She has spared his life, but he is still thinking ahead. Why should he live if he's going to stay in the Tower and etc.? He's still angry. He's still pissed off. And he doesn't want to die anymore, but why should he live? He didn't say thank you to Queen Elizabeth, nothing like that. He's got other things on his mind. So that's, but if you take it all the way back, now imagine the night of the Essex Rebellion and they're in the Tower. Oxford is faced with this situation where undoubtedly both Earls, Essex and Southampton, are going to be found guilty of high treason, and they're going to be executed forthwith, because the Crown does not have a democratic justice system. They do what they want. Now, when Oxford's faced with, he's got to first find a way. First, he has to agree with Robert Cecil, the principal secretary, who's got all the power now, even over Elizabeth. He's got to agree to sit on that jury. As you mentioned, he'll take the high position at the head of the tribunal, and he will have to vote guilty and condemn Southampton to death, which is not exactly something he would want to do, but he's going to do it. So think about those early days, and we say Sonnet 27. So if I go a few days more, we're already into legal words, facing a legal situation. And he is saying, the offenders, though thou repent, yet I have still the loss. The offender's sorrow lends but weak relief to him that bears the strong offense's loss or cross. And then he says, thy tears are pearl, they are rich, and they ransom all ill deeds. Now, to translate that, you better start crying, Southampton. You better show remorse. They will ransom your ill deeds, of which you're going to be convicted. So this is early on, a few days after the rebellion. He's already telling us what his negotiations, if you will, with Robert Cecil are. Dorothea.
Can we talk, can we just go back and talk a little bit for folks about who Robert Cecil is?
Yes. And before that was on my mind. And I want to throw out, I think, a key point that for me came out of the last one. And then I'll let you take over.
I like that. Thank you.
From there. But what I remembered is somebody had asked, what's the whole background of this whole thing? And I think it was Bonner who threw this out. That sort of tied it up with a little bow and everything. And your point, Bonner, I think it was you who said this whole thing was the sort of a culmination of a tension that had been building between the nobility and the rising middle class.
That was me.
Oh, that was you.
That was me.
I was attributing your brilliance to Bonner.
Okay. Sometimes I steal hers, so it's perfectly fair.
So Robert Cecil was the middle class gaining power, Essex not liking it at all. He's being pushed out of the way, sent off on pointless missions to Ireland. And so this was finally the big clash between.
Yeah, well, it goes back.
Right?
It goes back even further than that, because they were at Cecil House at the same time, and they did not like each other even as children. So
It had been building. It had been building for
so
years.
Robert Cecil is the first male child who lives that is born to William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, and his wife Mildred. William had an older son by his first wife, who actually inherits the Burleigh barony. But this son, Robert, arrives, and he's a very sickly child. He has some physical deformities that he inherits from his mother, scoliosis. And Essex is the total opposite of that. Essex is he's handsome and he's tall and he's got all this swash and this buckle and he's a great swordsman. And Robert Cecil is just short, kind of, has a hunched shoulder and drags a leg. And he's just really, really smart. So Cecil has been after Essex. And I think this is really important. Alex was talking about how quickly justice moved. But Cecil was setting Essex up for months, possibly even for years, waiting for him. I mean, there's a whole story we could go into about what went on in Ireland. But I think one thing that everyone overlooks is Cecil's patient planning of this trap. He had kind of a cabal with Cobham, Raleigh, and Grey to go after Essex, and Southampton was kind of secondary to that. But there's a wonderful moment where Raleigh writes Cecil. He calls Essex a tyrant. This is in a private letter, and tells Cecil not to relent in any way. The less Cecil makes of Essex, the less he shall be able to harm Cecil and his family. So it's his sense of the better Essex does, the worse you and your family will do. If Cecil keeps Essex down, Cecil's son will be able to keep more men at his heels than Essex's son and have a better house. So in addition to this, Robert Cecil has been taking money from Philip II. And when we get into the trial, there's a wonderful moment where Essex turns on Cecil and accuses him of this. And then Cecil calls in William Knollys, and William Knollys says, I never heard that. And that's kind of the end of it. But I think Hank is going to talk, and I'm going to talk, I think, later about the deal that is cut between Cecil and Oxford about James and Southampton, who gets what in exchange for what. The letters that pass back and forth between Oxford and Cecil all this time that Southampton is in the Tower after Essex loses his head so quickly. There are letters concerning the presidency of Wales that are absolutely fascinating letters. Oxford wants that presidency of Wales very badly. And if you think about it, it does have to do with the protection of the heir to the throne is the Prince of Wales. And Wales is supposed to be, providing that for the heir to the throne. So Cecil is on a personal mission in order to get revenge against Essex, to save his own skin because of the money he's taken from Philip II, and also to improve his standing because he is afraid that if James does not come to the throne, he will lose his position as Elizabeth is getting older and frailer. And that once Elizabeth dies, all the jackals are coming after Cecil. So that's what's kind of going on behind the scenes at this trial.
Dorothea, in the year or two prior to the Essex Rebellion and leading up, Cecil 2 or 3 times accused Essex in public of wanting to make himself king.
Yes.
Now, I think that's pretty interesting by itself. The fact, first of all, that Essex would have no right to be king.
I was going to say, based on what, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting that he would.
I can tell you why.
Bonner.
Honor, why?
It's based on something because he carries the blood royal through his mother, Lettice Knollys, through her mother, Katherine Cary, through her mother, Mary Boleyn. He's a great grandson of Henry VIII. Illegitimate.
Okay. That's a great.
Okay. There's a real reason there.
Okay.
The illegitimate blood royal is really pretty good because they've had other illegitimate people get to the with the blood royal getting to the throne of England. It had happened before, so there's a precedent for it.
Somebody off to the side is going, "Woohoo, Bonner!"
Way to go, Bonner. Yes.
And I'll tell you, this has been so suppressed. And Alison Ware, who's a very fine historian, she agrees, the different historians, that the official party line is that Mary Boleyn had a fling with Henry VIII, and then she went back to her husband and had these two children. The boy becomes Lord Hunsdon, and the girl is Katherine Cary, who ultimately marries into the Knollys family.
Yes.
With these Knollys. But it doesn't work. I've really worked on these dates a lot. For example, they tried in the Dictionary of National Biography, whoever wrote about Lettice Knollys and Katherine Cary tried to give her birthday as 1628, which would clear the time that she was the mistress of Henry VIII. Well, the problem with that is Katherine Cary is getting married in 1540. Do the math. From 1528 to 1540 is only a mere 12 years. She wasn't getting married at 12 years old. And starting to have her family with the Knollys. She was born. And mostly this is settled out as decades have gone by. But Alison Ware puts forth that, supports that Katherine Cary was the daughter of Henry VIII, which I totally believe, but she doesn't want to say that Lord Hunsdon was, though other historians reluctantly. You have to pull it out of them you have to pull teeth to get it out of them, but still they'll deny it because the Cary family has denied it through the centuries. I think it's a very good if one has some sort of relationship from a descending from from a king. It's a very smart move to hang around and be very loyal. You get a lot of good stuff that way. You get titles, you get land. You get it all, and then you just keep your mouth shut and play like it didn't happen. But it really works well. It sure worked well for the Cary family through the centuries.
One thing I got out of last time, too, is, Essex necessarily, it wasn't treasonous. He wanted to come talk to the Queen and make his point, but he did a lot of really stupid, impulsive things that just kept digging himself deeper and deeper in. So it just spun out of his control until the outcome we're going to talk about now, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was a psychological pressure because he knew Robert Cecil was out for him.
Yeah, and he kept doing dumb things like running in on the Queen in her bedroom.
He kept doing dumb. He kept doing dumb, emotional things to prove his loyalty because I think he could feel Cecil breathing down his neck, and he never knew quite when to look over his shoulder and find Cecil there.
So can we move on into the aftermath?
Yeah.
I want to point out something else too in a letter that right after the trial, and before I start that, there's something that has always puzzled me, and maybe the wonderful audience that we have can shed some light on this, because I know we've got a lot of very bright and insightful people that are kind enough to listen to us. But I've always wondered why they call it the Essex Rebellion. It is the Essex and Southampton Rebellion, because they plotted it together, they conspired together, they led it together, they were arrested together, they were tried together. And then suddenly, Southampton, of course, it's carried out, as we all well know, but Southampton just can sort of skate through the raindrops. And eventually, James lets him off the hook, and then he has a very nice life as a nobleman thereafter. But why do historians, this may be an obvious answer, but why do historians sort of brush Southampton under the table?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I've always wondered, because they do tend to. And in this beautiful bibliography that Hank has provided us with, I've looked it over carefully. It's really well done, but the historians really have ignored Southampton for the most part, and this Essex Rebellion thing.
Yes, but I don't think Robert Cecil ignored him privately.
Oh, no. But Robert Cecil,
much less Oxford. You have several sonnets, and this is before it's on February 16th, so 3 days before the trial, Oxford writes, "Thy adverse party is thy advocate." And Catherine Duncan Jones, who is a editor of the Sonnets, not an Oxfordian, said that really basically means your what did she say here? Your your legal opponent is also your legal defender. So to translate, Oxford is going to have to vote guilty to Southampton and condemn him to death. But behind the scenes, he's going to work with Cecil to find a way to save Southampton's life, to get him free from prison, to get him a royal pardon. All these things that he got in history will get. But this is what Oxford's trying to explain, that he's a great lawyer, so he goes to battle with Cecil behind the scenes and comes to something. But what Cecil wanted was to make sure that he brought James in. And the succession will happen soon enough. And when that happens, James will be the one. And Oxford had to, I think, agree to that. Like, I'm not gonna try to block that in any way if he could. But Oxford was, not a big player in all this publicly. He was only writing these and giving Southampton. I think he was getting these sonnets into the Tower, these early sonnets after the rebellion. And the reason I say that is that Southampton was only discovered in 2011, wrote a 74-line poem to the Queen. Whether it was delivered or not, we don't know. But that poem was found in the British Library in 2010 or 11 and published in one of the journals. And those lines that Southampton wrote, he's never wrote another poem before or since that we know of. But those lines are filled with concepts and words that relate to those very sonnets that I believe were written during this time. And so Oxford had a way to get into the Tower or get them into the Tower and I think to help Southampton because one of the big things, as it said before, thy tears are pearl and they'll ransom all ill deeds. In other words, the Queen likes nobles who fail her to write pleadingly some poetry to her. Essex, in the 4 days before he was executed, wrote 200 and something line poem to the Queen, and we have that.
But it didn't.
Pardon?
But it didn't help.
No, it didn't. No.
It didn't.
I have a couple of questions that people have passed here. Maybe we can just throw them out. Is it possible Cecil bought Edward de Vere's support for James as a king by letting Southampton live?
Yes. In so many words.
I think so. I mean, it's kind of an interesting, I look at it as kind of like a foursquare, which is kind of interesting. I think that none of the four of them, James, nor Southampton, nor Cecil, nor Oxford, could get what they needed without the other three. It's a really, really interesting negotiation. So Southampton, wants his life. Yeah. Oxford wants Southampton's life. Oxford has information about Southampton, which Cecil doesn't want to come out. James doesn't trust Cecil. Cecil had been writing James, trying to make it easy for him to become king, telling him to use him as his counselor while Elizabeth was still alive. That is treason, right? The Queen is not yet dead, and Cecil is trying to broker a deal with James. I'll help you become king if you make me your prime minister, your number one minister.
Right.
Everyone's out for themselves here.
That is treason. So James thinks, wow, I'd like to sit on the throne for England if I don't have to, fight anybody else for it, i.e., if Southampton really doesn't want it. And therefore, I need to trust someone. And there's this wonderful set of letters where James writes about 40, whoever 40 is. They all wrote in code. They all had numbers. There are some indications that 40 could be Oxford. And James writes letters to Cecil that say things like, I might be willing to do business with you, but only if 40 is in agreement, because he is an honorable man, and I trust him. And so we get the sense that over the months, as these letters were going back and forth, I also think that in those Wales letters, there's some code going on, because Oxford writes to Cecil the words brotherly, the words family, the words, concordance, these sort of let's do this together type of feeling. I think Oxford, who was losing his mind at this point, worrying that Southampton was going to be executed, had to pull on everything he had to broker this deal with his brother-in-law, with whom he never had a great relationship.
Yeah, and whatever dealing he was doing with Robert Cecil behind the scenes, he then, if he agreed to something, he then had to go to Southampton and say, here's what I negotiated. And Southampton, there are indications that in many cases he didn't like it, and he was balking at it. But that's to come. These are all before his the trial, even. In Sonnet 36, which is, I think, a major one, he's announcing to Southampton that we can't ever acknowledge each other. Let me confess that we two must be twain, without, and I may never more acknowledge thee, et cetera, nor with public kindness honor me. So that he's conveying here, we can't even know each other. We are separate completely. Not that I know anything about their public relationship at all. I know nothing about it, their relationship prior to this. And just to back up for a moment, what do Oxfordians think Oxford was dedicating those narrative poems to Southampton for? What if we took a poll of Oxfordians and asked them to say, here's the reason? They had some kind of private relationship that we don't know about? It's very interesting. But in any case, they can't now acknowledge each other. That was step one. There are a bunch of other steps to come in order for Southampton to be convicted, sentenced to death, and then a reprieve. But Essex died 6 days later, got his head chopped off, but not Southampton. And he had to wait a month before he found out. And I think this has to come from Cecil. It's pretty universally agreed that Cecil had all the power to do all this. And he was hell-bent to get James on the throne so he could, as you say, to keep his power behind the throne. So that was one thing Oxford conveyed to him. And then you have this Oxford in 37. I don't know how Oxfordians generally want to interpret this stuff, but he says that I in thy abundance am sufficed, and by a part of all thy glory live. What does that mean, Alex? What do you think? What glory does Southampton have? Unless he's being addressed as a king. The word glory, Shakespeare attaches to kingship.
Well, that's my answer, Hank, but not all Oxfordians agree with
No,
that.
but what do they think the reason he would use such language would be? If not that, then what? You know, this is maybe the wrong place, but is there ever a place for Oxfordians to hash this out? Because I believe that if it's not hashed out, we'll never get anywhere. That's my own thought. It's like a taboo subject. It's almost like we Oxfordians are human too, and we can be exactly like a Stratfordian, like who wants to balk at things. And if that's the way it is, we have to have another explanation.
So I think we just need to make that point for people who are maybe new to this a little clearer, as Jonathan might chime in at this point. There are some Oxfordians that believe that the relationship between Southampton and Oxford they were lovers. That is the older man being Oxford and the younger man being Southampton. There are other Oxfordians who believe that Southampton was Oxford's son, and that therefore the love that is being expressed, the anxiety that's being expressed, the everything I have is yours, is the love for a father for his son, and that the mother is the queen. And therefore, what is at issue with James and Southampton and Oxford and Cecil is Cecil's concern that Southampton will end up on the throne, and that would be the end of Cecil. Yes. And James is like, well, if he really doesn't want it, and Oxford tells me and gives me his word, then I will come, I will be king, but only if 40 gives me his word. And the other thing that's of note is that after James takes the throne, not only as you mentioned, does he write that release of Southampton before he leaves Edinburgh, he also showers not only Southampton's family, but Oxford's family and his kids and his wife, which an incredible amount of gifts, preferments, honors, places of honor for really the next 20 years. So until we get to far into the future with the debate over the Spanish marriage, where things kind of fall apart. But it's, to me, in the way I see these, it's a pretty much a quid pro quo. Southampton was attainted when he was accused of treason and thrown in the Tower. He gets back everything. He gets the Isle of Wight. He gets even more than he had before. And to me, that's James filling his obligations and taking care of Southampton and Oxford's other kids and his grandkids into the future. But that's just my view, and others do differ.
Well, yeah, and all with good intent too.
And good intent, absolutely.
Bash each other,
yes, we all have good intentions. Of course, we do.
Oh, sorry. One question related to lineages here that somebody had asked earlier. Were Essex and Southampton blood relatives? And I saw earlier somebody had noted a speculation that they were both bastard children of the Queen. But do we know anything definite?
Everybody was related.
That's a good answer. I am looking for this piece of evidence, but if somebody can tell me where Walter Devereux was on the day that Robert Devereux, that is Essex, who was beheaded, was conceived. Was he or was he not in Ireland? I am looking for that piece of information. I want to know, because if he was not around Lettice, then I have a really good guess who his dad was.
Well, at the far end of all this, Oxford also had to sacrifice his any connection to Shakespeare, because he had tied Southampton to Shakespeare, and therefore Cecil did not want Oxford involved with this at all, whether he was Southampton's father or whatever. It's a whole thing that has to be unraveled, and Oxford disappears. He just fades away within a year after the succession, just about a year, right? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
June 1604.
March to June, yeah, a year and a quarter.
15 months, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by that time, Oxford is slipping away. He's just slipped away. He's hardly noticed. No funeral, no big eulogies, no nothing. And we have to explain that.
You mean his name was buried where his body was?
That's right. Yeah. And you even put that in iambic pentameter. Oh God. But this was an immense sacrifice. If it meant so much to Oxford to tie Southampton to his works as Shakespeare, and if he went through all of this, and then the final sacrifice was of his name, his memory. And I think he believed that if the sonnets survived intact the way he wrote them and ordered them by number, that they would be his posterity. People would know. I think that's what I believe anyway.
And
there's sacrifice. Pardon?
I hear a comment saying somebody thinks, I kind of agree or not. Oxfordianism is occasionally falls too much into sheer speculation, like the discussion of son versus romantic feelings, only speculation. That's true. I think we need to own it and not turn into Stratfordians. But at the same time, speculation is what gives you look for research and to do research. So, it is speculation, but speculation in itself isn't bad.
No, and
it doesn't turn into fact.
Where is history written? History, I believe that it's not speculation it is speculation, yes. But when you look at the sonnets and see, Oxford had many languages he could write in. Well, this was a certain kind of language that he could write, and he understood, and many of his readers, I believe, would understand exactly what he's saying. He wrote as himself about the Queen, Cynthia, let's say. That's the Queen, Diana, and that's a language. That's using one word for another kind of thing, person or whatever. And I believe that's the way the sonnets are written, in another language that is easy to decipher. It's not some hieroglyphics. There's no codes going on. None of that stuff.
Sort of ties into something I saw somebody else mention earlier, and I've thought of the same thing. So, like Southampton wrote a poem, a begging, pleading poem, or to the Queen, and Essex did a few days before he died. So somebody had asked, how common was that a language? Like we think of Shakespeare writing his poems, but how common was it that like average people would suddenly write a poem to somebody? Was it more a cultural thing that everybody was writing poems to each other?
No, but these are dedications. They're public. They're printed in books. The book of Venus and Adonis with that narrative poem, let's say, or the Rape of Lucrece. But the sonnets are, no, it wasn't usual that people did that, but some poets did, I guess, right? I mean, you had Philip Sidney, you had...
The Queen was writing poems.
She was writing them too. I don't know.
Would it be more common like back then if I want to write a note to an email to Dorothea and I write it as a poem or something like that? And that would...
I think you should write Dorothea in poetry, yes.
Yeah.
I'm blue.
So, Hank, what I hear you saying is that you are using the sonnets, which are literature, as primary history sources. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I believe that he...
Hooray. Hooray.
Yeah.
Because I think that divide between what's studied as history and what is studied at university, at the university level, those departments never talk to each other. And yet, how does an author step out of his or her own time, particularly if you're writing about contemporaneous events with your own life? How are you not then a witness to that history? And why is it that historians are reluctant to view literature written contemporaneously with the events it reflects, such as the sonnets, as actual primary source history. And likewise, one might ask, why is it that Shakespearean scholars so rarely take a look at the history that is going on contemporaneously?
Because they know it's not there.
Well, that's the answer, isn't it?
My
Yeah.
opinion. But I have an analogy that would give you an idea of how I view the sonnets. And it's basically comes from how they were written, how they were created. I'm reminded of a book by the artist, Ben Shawn. And the title of his book was Form is the Shape of the Content. And his analogy for that was a tree. Every tree is different, one from the other. Each tree is the shape of its seed, its content, its inner self. So the form of it, and we see the leaves and all this, but we don't necessarily see the trunk of the tree and how it grew and all. Same with the sonnets. It's got a lot of words, and people study this word and that word and poetry and this, but basically, yes, my view is that it is really Oxford reacting to the events of each day, because these days, from the time of the rebellion until through the trial and Southampton being finally spared because he was going to die. Sonnet 66 was a suicide note. Tired with all these, for restful death I cry. And he lists things. And then he's saved. He's reprieved. It couldn't be any more. If Oxford has some love for Southampton, whatever that is, doesn't matter if at this point, exactly that we know what that relationship was. Father to son, there's evidence of that. But even in the first instance, we know what he feels about him. Thou art all the better part of me, he writes. What else can you say? I don't know what else, how more profound you could be in trying to tell somebody what you feel about them. And that is what he's chronicling, because he was faced with having to figure a way, as I say, to head the trial, condemn him to death, have him somehow reprieved by the Queen, which meant Cecil had to be the one to tell her, you can't do this, etc. At least that's what I think. It's quite a story underneath. And Oxford got himself into that fix by, in one instance, I guess, just attaching Southampton to his pen name. No one else was attached.
Did you say earlier, Hank, that you think maybe the burying of his identity as Shakespeare was part of the deal?
Ultimately, yes. And I believe that's your so-called rival poet series. A better spirit doth use your name, and all his might to make me tongue-tied, speaking of your fame. So in other words, he is hoisted by his own petard. That's what he's been told. Shakespeare will now take over, as he has been with the plays that were published under that name, and so on and so forth. And Oxford will disappear, his name.
So Hank,
yeah.
You're saying that is part of the deal with Cecil, that it's actually Cecil
because he attached it to Southampton.
That separation between Oxford and Shakespeare to be final. That is that is what is necessary to cause James to feel comfortable enough to come and accept the position.
Yes.
I mean, James is a very practical man. He's a very bright, very practical man. He doesn't want to step in the middle of a hornet's nest when he's got a nice country in Scotland that he is, clearly got the number one position on the throne.
He's also a very afraid person.
Yes,
However.
and he had some personal health issues as well. He apparently, there are indications that his tics and his moving, jerking legs and so forth were indicative of diseases we know today, but no one would have been able to identify them then. I have a lot of respect for James. I think he was a bright guy and happy to get the money in England, no doubt. It's a very rich country, but not a bad person.
Could I interrupt and just say that in January of 1604, now Oxford would die, quote unquote, in June. And in January, the Hampton Court Conference was held on the creation, deciding to create the King James Bible, which ultimately would be published in 1611. And there's some indication that a great writer's hand, who was very much Shakespearean, which is the adjective used most about that Bible, that Oxford had some hand in it. Either he wrote the final version or there was a committee and all this, but that he may have promised James to get to do that, because if there's any kind of glory that James wanted, it would be to have a King James Bible, let me tell you. And that may have been part of this. I don't know.
We've got just a few minutes left here, and I thought you talking about the emotion that comes through the sonnets, maybe we could go around, and if you have any thoughts on Shakespeare to wish him on his birthday, if we could. What I want to say about that is, and what you reminded me of, Hank, is when I first came across the sonnets, it was in high school, like so many people, and we were told the usual story of, oh, these were just poetic exercises he was writing to show off to his friends. And my reaction to that was, well, if he didn't care, why should I? But then later on, when I learned about Oxfordianism, I read the sonnets through again. And, I don't know what the story is behind them, and I respect your viewpoint. I'm agnostic on it. But what I couldn't get away from was that sheer emotion that came through them. And they actually brought me to tears, and I didn't know why. And you can't fake emotion like that coming through creative works. So that's, people say, what difference does it make who wrote Shakespeare? Well, that's the difference. It's a bunch of meaningless hack work, show off work, or it's somebody's, deepest gut stuff being spilled out right at you. So happy birthday, Shakespeare. You phony.
Hi,
Shakespeare. Right back.
Anyone else, Alex? What?
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I want to talk about very briefly about Sonnet 145, which is near the end, and you don't have to know all the sonnets by heart, but 145 is the only sonnet in the whole package that is not in iambic pentameter. It's in iambic tetrameter. And this has caused the Stratfordian academics, it ties them up in knots. They can't figure out why all of a sudden there's a tetrameter sonnet in the middle of everything else being a pentameter. And a lot of them seize on the next to the last line, I hate from hate away she threw, and they say, oh, that's young William Shakespeare punning on his wife's name. Hate away equals Hathaway. It's a little joke. And some of them think that this is an early Shakespeare sonnet that somehow got plugged in between 144 and 146. They don't really know, does it belong there? Stephen Booth, one of the traditional Stratfordian analysts, thinks, well, it's an odd sonnet, but it does seem to fit the sequence here. I want to give giant kudos to Hank Whittemore for an observation he made in the monument. Whether you agree with Hank's theory or not, I think this is absolutely brilliant. The reason that 145 is there and that it is in tetrameter instead of pentameter is because it's the poet's way of telling the reader that a different voice is speaking in that one poem. The poet himself is writing in the first person in all the others, but what way in a series of poems can you indicate the presence of another speaker? Well, the easiest way to do that is to change the meter or change the rhyme scheme. He changes the meter, and Hank's view is that this is Southampton's voice. It doesn't necessarily mean it was written by Southampton, but it was written by the person to whom the sonnets are addressed. And I think that is just a brilliant observation, no matter what your theory of what the sonnets all mean.
If you put that in a play, it would sound completely different. It would be a whole different.
Exactly. You'd have a person with a different voice, but since these are made to be read, you can't do that. And so, unless you're going to put in a sign, reader, here's a poem by another one of my characters, which is pretty awkward. You just slip it in this way. Anyway, Hank, I think that's brilliant. That's worth the price of admission.
And as for that hate away, isn't it funny? At other times, we're told, "Oh, you're not supposed to read them autobiographically," except when it suits the strategy.
And Hathaway.
Dorothea Bonner, any?
So isn't today also Willis Stratford's death date?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, they say so. Yes, that's why they say it's his birthday. Actually, right?
It's his birthday and his and his
So let's go disturb his bones and things.
Well, actually, we don't know if it's his birthday. It's just he was baptized on the 26th, and I thought they say by tradition it happened when a baby is 3 days old.
Interesting,
Alex. But I don't think we know an actual.
We don't necessarily know, and we certainly don't know where he was born. Probably in Stratford, but which house?
Yep, one of several. Which we have a whole past video on that we want to get up sometime soon.
Also, see the New York Times today had a little thing.
Elizabeth Winkler has a story on birthplace. It's great. Bonner, any final thoughts?
No, it's been very illuminating, and that's what we try to do here. A lot of fun.
Somebody says maybe he was born on the dung heap.
Oh well,
okay. That's been turned around too. The dung heap was apparently not an offense. It was more of something that a lot of people kept, and you paid a license fee to maintain a dung heap on your property. So John Shakespeare was not, according to this article, a scofflaw.
He was just renting his dung heap. And on that note, I think we need to end for a moment. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again for coming, Hank.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to see you all.
Drive safe, y'all.
Yeah, drive home safely. Drive fast. Take chances. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.